head over to database.new to create a new Supabase project. You may need to authenticate with GitHub if this is your first time using Supabase. I'm going to name my project Chatter and click this button to generate a secure password. Make sure you click to copy this password to somewhere secure, as this is the database password for your Postgres instance and the only time you'll see it. For region, I'm going to select Oceania, Sydney, as that is the closest region to me, and then click Create New Project. Now this will take a little bit of time to set up our new Supabase project. And now that we're up and running, I'm going to come across to the table editor and click New Table. Now the name for our table is going to be Messages. We're going to leave row level security enabled and also leave real-time disabled. For our columns, we want to change the data type of our ID to be UUID. And then click these three little dots for the default value and say we want to call this function to generate a new version 4 UUID anytime we create a new row on this table. Now, since created@'s default value is now, which will give us back a timestamp for the moment when we're creating this new row, it doesn't really make sense for this row to ever be null. So if we click this little cog, we can see some more options for our column, and we can untick is nullable, as this will always have a value. And now we want to add a new column, and the name of this column is going to be content. So this will be the actual content that the user types in for each message. Therefore, we want the type of this to be text. We don't want this to have a default value, but we also probably don't want this to be nullable, as it doesn't really make sense for there to be a message with no content. So untick is nullable, and now when we click save, this will create that table along with those different columns. We can now insert some test data by clicking insert row and typing in the content for our first message, and click Save to insert this new row into our database, which we can see there. Let's insert a second message and click Save. So now we have a new Supabase project with a table for our messages and 2 rows of example data. Type npx create-remix to create a new remix project. I'm going to call mine Chatter again. This is going to step us through some configuration questions. We're going to select just the basics, and we're eventually going to deploy this to Vercel, so I'm going to select that here. We're going to use TypeScript for our project, and we want to run npm install. Once that's finished installing, we can change into that directory, and then open this project up in VS Code. And this has created a basic remix application for us, and under the app folder and routes, we can see index.tsx, which is the route for our homepage. Let's open up our terminal here, and we can type npm run dev to start a development server running on localhost over port 3000. Now, if we navigate to that page in a browser, we see the text welcome remix and these 3 links, which is exactly what we see in our component here. If we were to replace all of this JSX with the text hello eggies, you'll see as soon as we save our component, the text is updated in the browser. We want to display the messages from Supabase on our landing page here in our Remix application. Let's start by quitting our development server and typing npm I or install at supabase/supabase-js. And once that's finished, we want to create a new file to hold our environment variables. Let's make sure that this is at the root of our project, and its name is going to be .env. This has already been added to our git ignore file, and so we don't need to worry about these values being committed to GitHub. In this file, we want a Supabase URL and a Supabase anon key. These 2 values can be found in our Supabase dashboard under Settings and API. You'll see we've got our URL here and our public anon key. We now want to create a folder called utils. This should also be at the rootmost point of our application, and in there we want a file called supabase.ts. Let's import the create client function from at supabase/supabase-js and make the default export from this file a call to create client, passing it process.env.supabase URL and our Supabase anon key. Now TypeScript is telling us that this value might not exist, and so we can add an exclamation mark to say these values will definitely exist in all of the environments, and let supabase throw a runtime error if these don't exist. Now back over in index.tsx, we can import our new supabase client and export a loader function to fetch data from supabase. So we can say const data will be the value we get back from supabase. When we call supabase.from the messages table, we want to select all of the columns and then return this data from our loader. We can then access this data in our component by calling the useLoaderData hook, which we get from @remixrun/react. We can then render out this data instead of our h1. And if you haven't seen this before, this just allows us to pretty print out a big JSON object to the page. So now if we run our development server again, and then refresh the browser, we'll see that we're getting back an empty array. Now this might seem like an error because we know that there are 2 messages in our supabase database. And if we open up the console and go over to the network tab and refresh the page, we'll see that all of these status codes look like they were successful requests. And the reason for this is back over in our supabase database, we enabled row-level security for our messages table. And this will automatically deny all database actions, so any request to select, insert, update, or delete. If we want to enable one of these actions for our messages table, we need to write a row-level security policy. And we can do that by clicking this button or heading over to authentication and then policies. And now we want to click new policy. Now there are some templates for common policies that you might want to write, but we're going to click full customization and write this from scratch. So our policy name is going to be allow users to read messages, and we want to allow the select operation. We're going to leave the default for target roles, which will be public, and then under our using expression, we just need to give it an expression that evaluates to either true or false to either allow this action or continue denying it. If we just put in the value true, then this is always going to enable that select action. So let's click review, which is going to show us the SQL that's going to be run against our database, and we can click save policy to run that SQL. And now if we go back to our application and refresh, we can see that our Remix application is correctly displaying the messages from Supabase. Our Remix application is a TypeScript project, but right now we have very little type safety. If I have a look at data in our component, it's being inferred as any, and in our loader, TypeScript has no idea what Supabase is, or that this is a table, or that we're selecting columns, and therefore what our data is going to be. We can automatically generate TypeScript types from our Supabase database using the Supabase CLI. Copy the installation command that's specific to your operating system, and then head back over to your terminal and paste it in. If you already have the Supabase CLI installed, you can replace install with upgrade to upgrade the package to the latest version. And once that's finished, we can use the Supabase CLI to log in and generate an access token. So let's copy this URL and navigate to it in our browser. We can then generate a new token. My token name is going to be chatter. And now we can copy this value back over to our terminal and paste it in. So now that our Supabase CLI is authorized to use our Supabase account, we can use it to generate TypeScript definitions for our specific project. So let's say Supabase gen for generate, our types for TypeScript by providing it our project-id. And we can find that in our .env file, as it is the part of our Supabase URL that's after HTTPS, but before .supabase.co. So I'm going to copy this value and paste it into my command here. We then use the greater than symbol to say we want to write these types to a file, and our file is going to be called db_types.ts. And now back in our project, we can see that that db_types file has been created and has an interface for our database, which has all of our tables and columns from Supabase. Now something to keep in mind is this won't automatically stay up to date with our Supabase instance. Anytime we make structural changes in Supabase, we need to rerun this command. But now that we have all our TypeScript types for Supabase declared, we can use that in our Supabase utility file. We can import the type of database from db_types, and then the create client, which is currently just returning a Supabase client of any public any, can actually take in a type. So here this would be our database. And now when we check the type of our client, it's returning us a properly typed supabase client with our messages and each of our columns. So if we head back over to index.tsx, we can see that our supabase client is now properly typed, and from knows that it can only select from messages, and select knows that we can only select an ID created at or content. And if we have a look at the data that we get back, it knows that it's either this shape of data or null. But if we have a look at the data that we're getting back by calling the useLoaderData hook, we can see that this is still being implicitly set to any. We can fix this by updating the signature of our loader function and saying that our parameters are going to be an object of loader args. And this is a type that we can pull in from @remixrun/node. And I'm just going to fix up this import to say that it's importing a type and then put it below the other imports. We can now tell the useLoaderData function what kind of type to expect, which is going to be a type of loader. And so this is going to infer the return type of this loader above, see that it's giving us back this data from supabase, which is then going to pipe through the correct type to the data object that we get in our component. Now, I don't like that this data object could be null. If we have a collection of messages, then I want to know that we have an array of messages. Otherwise, I would expect this to be an empty array. So back up in our loader, I want to return an object that has the key messages either set to the data that we get back from supabase or to an empty array. And now we'll see this has lit up red because it knows that data no longer exists. We're expecting to get back messages, and so we can update the value that we're destructuring from here and the value we're rendering out from our component to be messages. And if we go back to the browser and refresh, we should see that nothing has changed.